Good afternoon. We are continuing on with Chapter 9, the U.S.-Dakota War of 1862. We left off with hearing about how the settlers were being attacked. We have the blue box with Mary Schwant, and remember, she was the one who was leaving her place of employment, whatever house she was helping at. They were in a wagon, and she was with some of her friends. Some Dakotas stopped them. They killed the men in the group and took the girls. She's only 14. She's not a woman yet. She's a girl. And they took them prisoner. So this is how she felt.
In their own words, Mary Schwant. Mary Schwant was 14 years old when the war began. Her parents, her sister, and 2 of her brothers were killed in the fighting, and she was captured. Her recollections of the war were published in 1894.
Well, in Little Crow's village, I saw some of my father's cattle and many of our household goods in the hands of the Indians. I now knew that my family had been plundered, and I believed murdered. I was very, very wretched, and cared not how soon I too was killed.
How does she know that her family was good? Why would she think that? Eleanor? She saw all their household stuff in Little Crow's village. How would it get there? How would their house get emptied out unless they killed her family, right? And took her stuff as like the spoils of war. We get this because we killed the people that lived here. So she's devastated. She witnessed her friends get killed. She's taken captive. And now she knows that her family has died. She's heartbroken. And this isn't just Mary's story. This is a lot of the settlers. They watched people they loved die. They knew all of this death that's happened. Some are being taken prisoner. Think of how scary that is. Think of how sad that is. And that's going to help you see why they react the way they do once the war is done. Okay, because this is not an easy thing that they are going through.
Destruction of war. 9 days after the fighting began, Colonel Henry Sibley, the former Minnesota governor, led more than 1,400 soldiers into the prairie to battle the Dakota. Soon it became clear to many Dakota that they could not win. By the end of September, the U.S.-Dakota War was over. The Dakota had been defeated in a final battle at Wood Lake on September 23rd. Over 2,000 surrendered to Sibley's forces. Many hundreds more fled from Minnesota to avoid capture, including Little Crow and some of his followers.
What did the Dakota think was going to happen? What else was happening at this time, Adeline?
I thought that they wouldn't fight back because they were so focused on the Civil War.
Yeah, they thought the U.S. is so worried about the Civil War, maybe we can get our land back here because they're busy. What actually happens?
What's
his name?
Henry Sibley.
Yeah, Colonel Henry Sibley leads 1,400 trained soldiers. They weren't out fighting in the Civil War. They were protecting Minnesota. So he comes and says, nah, we're going to stop this. Enough. So not only were the settlers and the townspeople all coming together to protect their towns and help one another out to protect the fort so the Dakota can't overrun those, now they get the reinforcements. Now Henry Sibley comes with help, and they're able to stop the war. They end it there because Henry Sibley comes with all of these soldiers. The Dakota know, okay, there's more where that comes from, right? They're stopping us as it is. We know there's more coming. It's done. So some escape. They leave Minnesota. And we're going to see what happens to all the rest. So that was number 10 on your comprehension page. What caused the war to end? What happens to end the war?
The war had taken a tremendous toll on the region's people and landscape. Just over 70 U.S. soldiers and between 75 and 100 Dakota soldiers had been killed. More than 500 settlers had been killed, most in raids by the Dakota in the first week of the war. Hundreds of farms were left empty as 20,000 settlers fled for safety. Towns like New Ulm were devastated. There, dozens of buildings were burned, and hundreds of residents were left wounded or homeless. This destruction would affect southern Minnesota for years as people struggled to rebuild their lives. While settlers rebuilt, the Dakota, including those who had not fought in the war, were to suffer terrible consequences.
They were worried in the beginning. Remember, it all started with a few Dakota getting upset with the few settlers who wouldn't give them some eggs, right, because they were starving. Tensions rose, they snapped, and those, 3 Dakota killed the 5 settlers, right? Some of the Dakota leaders said, well, we don't want to turn them over. What they did is wrong. Nobody ever argued that. Obviously, that's wrong. But if we turn them over to the government, they're going to hold us all responsible. And they're going to take it out on all the Dakota because we don't trust the U.S. That was over 5 settlers dying. Now we have 70 U.S. soldiers, 500 settlers dying. How do you think this is going to go for the Dakota? Really bad. Really, really bad. Because not only is the U.S. upset with them, who else is really upset with them? Well, that's the U.S. The settlers. They're scared, they're sad, and now they are angry. 500 settlers are killed. They were innocent. They had nothing to do with anything. They were just trying to have a better life, setting up their farms. And now they get attacked and destroyed. Was it all the Dakota that were attacking the settlers? No. Remember, there's 2 types of Dakota. Farm Dakota, traditional Dakota. Traditional Dakota are the ones that went to war. Farm Dakota were the ones that were trying to make the peace, trying to get the captives released, not fighting. So now we have the traditional Dakota. Was it all the traditional Dakota going crazy killing everyone? No. There was only a small group that actually went out killing settlers. There were the women and the elderly and the kids who weren't a part of the fighting at all. Remember, the one little girl woke up in the middle of the night scared because she heard the gunfire. She wasn't fighting, right? We had the Dakota soldiers. Only a small portion of them are the ones that actually went out and did the horrible acts of killing in that first week of the settlers. The other ones were just trying to say, hey, what you've done to us is wrong. We're starving, we're dying. We need something better. That was the majority of the Dakota. Let's see what happens to the Dakota. The aftermath.
The aftermath. That fall, Colonel Sibley set up a military court to judge the hundreds of Dakota that his men had taken prisoner. He set up this court in the kitchen of one of the Lower Sioux Agency's trading houses. The judges were a panel of Army officers who just days before had fought in the Dakota War. They rushed through dozens of cases each day. The Dakota defendants often were brought to court chained together in groups. Like some other military trials of the period, they had no lawyers to present their case.
What do we know about court cases in today's world? What have you seen on TV, in the movies? How are they set up? So there's 2 lawyers, right? There's the prosecutor, who's trying to get the guilty verdict, and then there's the defense attorney, who's protecting the defendant's rights, trying to get them to get the not guilty verdict, right? So that lawyer is the one that's arguing. They know the laws. And they're saying, oh, no, they're not guilty because of these reasons. James? Then we have, what else? What else is in the court?
There's a judge.
There's the judge. He's the one that's got the final say. Who else is in the court, Bridget?
Cops and like police people.
Sometimes if they're being used as witnesses. Okay, who else, Christina?
There's also like people watching.
People watching. Who else? This is an important group.
There's also people that support a certain side. Like,
Well, the spectators. The jury. The jury are the people that sit in that special little section that are hearing the defense, they're hearing the prosecutor, and they're deciding, are they guilty? In today's world, that jury is made up of your peers. So, as an adult, I can get jury duty. I can get a little ticket in the mail saying, okay, it's your turn. You need to go be on the jury. So it's just regular, everyday citizens. Because the people that are being put on trial are regular people usually, right? So it's not the soldiers, they have their own court system. This is, if you're a citizen, your jury is going to be citizens. Who was the jury for the Dakota? Nope, they had a jury. Who does it say was on the jury? Eleanor? No. Adeline?
The jury was the,
Oh, I'm sorry. They don't even use the word jury. They use the word judges. They didn't even have a jury. You're right. There was no jury. I thought it said judges. I thought it said jury where it says judges. So they don't even have a jury. Who are the judges, Robbie?
army officers.
The army officers, who they were just fighting 2 days before. They're fighting for their lives, these army officers, and now they're the judge. There's no jury. There's no lawyer. So the person who has the say in what happens to the Dakota is the person who was just fighting for their life 2 days ago against the Dakota. Do you think that's going to be unbiased?
No.
They're going to be upset. You were trying to kill me. I'm going to hold you all accountable. And not only that, they're brought together as a group. They brought them in as groups. So in today's world, you get accused of something, you go to trial, and you get to defend yourself. But back then, they had 10 Dakota all chained together, 8, whatever the number, it's a group. There's a group of them. They don't get to say, well, wait, that wasn't me. I didn't go out and kill the settlers. I was the one doing this. I didn't do that bad stuff. They can't defend themselves. They're all lumped together. The judge, who all he sees is Dakota, that he's upset with, he's going to find them all guilty. Right? He's not looking at their each individual case.
The missionary Stephen Riggs, who had worked for years among the Dakota, was troubled by what he considered a rush to judgment. I dislike the way the trials were conducted, he wrote. If the Indians have done wickedness, they should have something like a fair trial, even for our own sake.
So remember those missionaries, they were the ones that were trying to bring Christianity to the Dakota, introducing them to Jesus. Another goal they had was to look out for the Dakota. They wanted what was best for them. They were the ones supporting them. And Stephen Riggs is saying, this is not right. This is not fair to the Dakota at all. They don't have a fair judge. They don't have a lawyer. They're being judged all as a group, not individually. This is not right. So, number 11, how did Minnesotans react to Colonel Henry Sibley's court? So that's what we're going to hear about. So we know that the missionary, Rocco, we know the missionary was saying, hey, this isn't right. Well, how did the Minnesotans feel? Hello, Mrs. Katie. Yep, he is on his way. Thanks, bye. So the Minnesotans who witnessed their friends their neighbors, their family members get killed in front of their eyes, their farms are being destroyed, towns are being burned down. How do they feel about it?
Unlike Riggs, most Minnesotans supported the trials. Outraged by the war, most settlers wanted to see the Dakota punished. Dakota soldiers had killed hundreds of people. Many survivors had been forced to witness the deaths of their friends and families. Most Minnesotans demanded revenge. Newspapers such as the Faribault Central Republican expressed it this way: "Extermination, swift, sure, and terrible, is the only thing that can give the people of Minnesota satisfaction or a sense of security."
What does extermination mean? No? When you have an exterminator come to your house because you have lots of ants, they spray to kill all of the ants. Extermination means killing all of them. So how did Minnesotans feel about the Dakota? Yeah, Adeline's doing a thumbs down. They wanted all the Dakota gone because they're scared of the Dakota, because they were trying to kill them, because they witnessed all this awfulness that just happened. They're really upset. Do they have every right to be upset? Yeah, they witnessed their families dying, their homes are destroyed. You're going to be upset. Is it okay to act on your emotions? No. Just like it wasn't okay for those Dakota to kill the settlers over the eggs, they had every right to be upset. They were starving. Doesn't mean you get to kill. These settlers are upset, rightfully so. They saw horrible things happening that they were innocent. They should not have happened to them. They're upset. They want all the Dakota exterminated, them all gone. It's legitimate feelings, but we don't get to act on those feelings. Well, let's see what happens.
The military court took 39 days to sentence 303 Dakota men to death. The convicted men were marched to a new military camp near Mankato. Under U.S. law, none of those men could be executed or killed without the approval of President Abraham Lincoln. At the urging of Minnesota missionary Henry Whipple, Lincoln's staff reviewed the cases. The more Lincoln learned, the more troubled he felt. In November, he met with Whipple, who described the terrible conditions on the reservations prior to the war and asked the president to show mercy.
303 Dakota are sentenced to die because their judges were those army officials. They had no lawyer. They didn't have a jury of their peers. They were being judged all as a group, not individually. And there was a lot of anger. Understandably, people are angry, but we have checks and balances in place. They don't just get to execute them all. They have to go to the president for to get the approval to execute them. Was President Lincoln here in Minnesota for this war? No. So does he have the same emotions that the Minnesotans have?
No.
No. He's unbiased. He's going to look at it and say, okay, what actually happened? Let's look at all the perspectives. Were settlers killed? Yes. Did some Dakota do awful things that they need to have severe consequences for? Yes. Was it all of these? No. Let's sit back and really look at each individual person, look at all of the cases and see what actually happened. Why were they doing this? So the Dakota wanted to fight because their conditions were so awful. The U.S. did wrong. They didn't keep up with the annuities. The Dakota were starving. Nobody was looking out for them. I get that. All right, so President Lincoln is saying, I understand why there was the war to begin with. They took it to an extreme, some of them. They need to be held accountable. But not all 303 that were sent to me. Again, another missionary who was saying, let's look out for these Dakota. Let's make sure that they're not being treated unfairly. So look at what ends up happening.
In the end, Lincoln approved the execution of 39 Dakota who had been convicted of crimes against civilians. On the morning of December 26, 1862, in front of a large crowd in Mankato's public square, 38 of the Dakota selected by Lincoln were hanged. One man, Roundwind, or Tatemima, was spared at the last minute. It was the largest mass execution in U.S. history, before or since.
303 were sent to be executed. In the end, it got narrowed down to just 38 actually being executed. So President Lincoln, no, it does not. It says 38 were executed. So President Lincoln was able to be unbiased and be able to look at all the individual cases and say, yeah, these are the ones that went out on those war parties and were killing settlers. These ones were just fighting for their security, fighting for their families, fighting because they weren't getting what they were supposed to get from the annuities from the U.S. government. So only 38 actually were doing all of the horrible acts, and they were held accountable for that. The largest mass execution ever, before and since. They were all hanged at the same time. So that is number 12. Initially, 303 Dakota were sentenced to death. Why were 38 hanged?
President Lincoln ordered the rest of the convicted men be moved from Mankato to a military prison camp in Iowa called Camp McClellan. While imprisoned there, more than 120 of the nearly 300 Dakota men died as a result of poor conditions.
So even though they weren't executed, they were spared. They were sent to a war camp, or not a war camp, a prisoner camp, because they were fighting against the U.S., so it makes sense. The conditions there were so awful, but still 120 of them died. So even though they were spared from the execution, a lot of them still died anyways.
Exile. After the war, the U.S. government believed it was not safe for the Dakota to stay in Minnesota. Although many had fled after the war, nearly 2,000 Dakota men, women, and children were in the custody of Sibley's army. The convicted men went to Mankato to be held until their cases were reviewed. The U.S. government decided to force the rest of the Dakota, including many who did not participate in the attacks, to leave their homeland.
So now we're coming to what the Dakota were worried about right at the beginning. We're all going to be held accountable. We're going to have all these horrible consequences put on all of us Dakota. So not only were the soldiers, the 38 were executed, the other almost 300 were sent to the prisoner camp. Now what do we do with all the rest of the Dakota? So number 13 says, describe the conditions of the internment camp at Fort Snelling. Internment camps are when you take a whole population of people and you put them take them from their homes and you put them into a camp situation. Happened during this time period, happened during World War II with Japanese Americans, because Japan had bombed Pearl Harbor, and so Americans became scared of any Japanese person, thinking they were going to attack America, even though they might have been American citizens. Japanese Americans were American citizens, and they were all lumped together and put into internment camps because we were scared of them. We were scared of the Dakota. We put all the Dakota into an internment camp. Find out what those camps are like.
About 1,700 Dakota women, children, and elders were forced to travel just over 100 miles from the Lower Sioux Agency to an internment camp on the river banks below Fort Snelling. The march was hard and dangerous. Despite being guarded by U.S. soldiers, the Dakota were attacked by settlers as they passed through the town of Henderson. At least one Dakota child was killed on the march, and several were injured. The 4-mile-long group of wagons, animals, and people arrived at Fort Snelling on November 23, 1862. The conditions at Fort Snelling were difficult. The Dakota were encamped on the riverbanks surrounded by a wooden wall. They were guarded and fed by U.S. soldiers. At times, they received permission to gather wood and fish outside the camp, but this could be risky. There were many people still angry about the war, and several Dakota were attacked and killed. Measles and other diseases were also spreading that winter. This affected both the Dakota and the many settlers who fled to St. Paul during the war. Overall, between 100 and 200 Dakota died from disease, illness, and attacks during the miserable winter of 1862 to 1863. By early 1860 signed with the Dakota in Minnesota. The reservation and the annuities were gone. The Dakota would be forced to leave the state. In the spring, those who had survived the winter in the internment camp were exiled. Steamboats, barges, and trains carried more than 1,500 Dakota on rivers and over land to a reservation at Crow Creek in what is now South Dakota. It was a desolate place, and food was scarce. The government sent food, but it was never enough and almost always came late. Hundreds of Dakota died from hunger and disease.
Okay, so it wouldn't let me pause. So let's go back to look at the internment camp. Okay. Think about the Dakota that were sent to the internment camp. Who was it that was sent to the camp?
Women, children, and elders.
Yeah. Were they the ones that were attacking people?
No.
No. But they're Dakota, so people were scared of them. And now, how do people feel about the Dakota? Yeah. They're angry at them. You Dakota are the ones that killed my family. Was it the women and the children and the elderly? No. But as they're walking through Fort Snelling, they're getting attacked by the settlers because the settlers are so angry with them. Again, justifiable emotions. Please stop. It's very distracting. Justifiable emotions, right? We would be angry if we saw our family killed, our friends, our neighbors, but we don't get to act on those emotions. Okay, so that's what the settlers are doing. They're attacking innocent people, just like some of those Dakota attacked the innocent settlers. It wasn't right for them to do it. It's not right for the settlers to do it now. And then they show up at the internment camp. It's not good conditions. Right? There's diseases being spread around. They try to go out and get food, and there's people being attacked, going out to get fish, going out to get the meat for their families. Bad conditions at the internment camp. They finally survived that horrible winter, and in 1863, what happens now? What did we just learn about? What happens to the Dakota that actually survive all that horribleness at the internment camp? What happens in 1863, Aiden? The U.S. government said, shh, you went to war against us. We don't need to honor these treaties. You didn't honor them. Treaties are null and void. You have lost all those reservations, that land that you had gotten in the treaties. So we kept shrinking it down. Now you don't have any. Instead of exterminating you and killing all of the Dakota, we're going to exile you. We're going to send you out of Minnesota because we don't want you to attack again. So they exiled all the rest of the Dakota except for a few of the farm Dakota who had actually been helping, right? We learned how some of the farm Dakota were trying to get the prisoners released The farm Dakota weren't the ones fighting, it was the traditional Dakota. So they do let up some of the farm Dakota stay, but all the other Dakota are exiled out to a reservation in South Dakota, a very desolate place. It's bleak. There's nothing there. They don't have the lakes that we have here. They don't have the crops growing. They don't have the wildlife that they can hunt to eat. There's nothing there for them. So they're sent to South Dakota and they are miserable. It is not good conditions. So that's number 13 and 14. We're on this page.
The missionary John P. Williamson, who had worked with the Dakota in Minnesota, went to visit. He was appalled by the conditions there. He called Crow Creek a desert and a place that was totally unfit for the habitation of any human being. In 1866, the government finally let the exiled Dakota move to a new reservation in Nebraska. The land was better there than it had been in South Dakota, but it was nothing like home. It was not Minnesota.
So finally, after a few years, the U.S. government says, okay, yeah, that South Dakota reservation's awful. We'll let you move to Nebraska. But where did the Dakota want to be? Why do they want to be in Minnesota? Their home. This is where the Dakota have lived for thousands of years. So we get to be in Nebraska. It's not home. It's not where I'm connected to. It's not where my ancestors are. It's not where I need to be.
A changing landscape. In the summer of 1863, hardly anyone lived in southwestern Minnesota. Nearly all the settlers in the region had abandoned their homes during the war. Most of the Dakota either had fled from the state or been exiled. Only about 200 Dakota who had helped the settlers during the war were allowed to stay. As the years went by, the Dakota remained separated. Many chose to stay on reservations in Nebraska, North Dakota, South Dakota, and Canada. Many others, however, wanted to return home to Minnesota. Within a few years, some of the Dakota who had been forced to leave their homeland returned to live alongside their relatives who had been allowed to stay in Minnesota. Beginning in the 1880s, these Dakota worked with the U.S. government to establish new communities at the old Upper and Lower Sioux agencies, at Prairie Island, and at Prior Lake.
These are your Tuesday afternoon announcements. We have one and only announcement. It is if all choir kids could please go to the gym after school. All choir kids please go to the gym after school. Remember to be kind, be brave, believe, be strong and courageous, for the Lord your God is with you wherever you go. Have a wonderful Tuesday evening. We will see you all here tomorrow to celebrate Mass together. Have a great evening.
Okay, so are the Dakota completely gone from Minnesota by the 1880s? Yeah. Some of the farm Dakota have been allowed to stay. Some now, a couple decades later, are able to move back. But is it the same amount that used to live here? No. Their numbers have gone way down. They don't have a reservation land. They're trying to reestablish their community, but there's not much here. There's not much Dakota here. They don't have any of their traditional lifestyle that they used to have. Their population has changed significantly. Let's see what happens with the settler population. What do you think is going to happen? Kamala? Why would it increase so much? Because there's no more reservation land. All that land went up for grabs. Brought in even more settlers because there's more land to bring them in. So the settlers' numbers go way up.
By the time they established these communities, though, the Dakota could hardly recognize the land they had lived on for generations. It had changed forever. Tens of thousands of new settlers had moved to Minnesota, intent on farming the land in the European-American style.
So So when we look at number 15, by the 1880s, how had Minnesota's settler and Dakota populations changed? What happened to the settler population? What happened to the Dakota population? They both changed. How? Okay. So, yes, Helen. So, tomorrow, we're gonna go over some of those blue boxes and some of the parts that we didn't go over. But we are done with all of our questions on the comprehension page. We are not correcting it tomorrow, but you do need to make sure that you are done with them. So, finish, make sure you've answered all the questions correctly. Tomorrow, we're gonna go through some of the boxes that we haven't covered yet, and we're gonna do some review. We don't have class on Thursday. We will have class Friday. Friday, we are correcting the comprehension page. So that means Monday is the test. Okay? Like, we're getting it back right now. So I finally got all of, because people have been gone, I finally got all of our tests back. So I have the tests corrected. I had them yesterday, but we didn't have social studies yesterday. So I'm gonna pass back tests today. Shh, please be listening. Normally when it's an open book test, I don't let you make corrections, but I'm going to allow it this time for partial credit. You need to put down page numbers. I need these tests turned in by Friday if you're gonna try to get partial credit back. Remember, on tests, the whole test is complete sentences. So some of us may have put the correct year that Minnesota became a state, but we didn't put it as a sentence. Needs to be as a sentence, the whole test, complete sentences. If you are watching this at home, I hope you are well. I hope to see you soon. Have a wonderful day.